Hello, in this video we're going to be talking about the words that are associated with building molecules. So let's not waste any of your time, let's get right to it. Now when we're talking about words that are associated with building molecules, what we really want to think about is kind of the big picture, long-term ramifications of what we're talking about. And these are going to be some of these words we've been using. The rest of these words that we're going to be really stressing in chapter 6, 7, and 8. Our 3-chapter walkthrough as far as a journey on creating energy or having energy to use for all the things that the cells need to do. So as we look at our list, one of them, dehydration synthesis, we've been using since chapter 3, and we will continue. And once we look at 7 and 8, we'll say those words a bunch of times. But dehydration synthesis, the idea of building molecules, taking those monomers, and through the process of releasing water, making those either disaccharides, lipids, triglycerides. Remember, the dehydration synthesis emphasized those OH bonding sites, and then there'd be a bonding element. In a lot of the cases with the carbohydrates and the lipids, it would be oxygen. But when we got into the nucleic acids and the proteins, there'd be other elements that would be left behind. But it's the idea of releasing that water and building those molecules. Now, when we think in anabolic pathways, once we get into enzymes, here at the end of this video series, chapter 6, we'll really showcase what these pathways look like and how they work. But it's just the idea of a molecule, or if we're building a series of monomers, the process that they go through, being attached to an enzyme, and the enzyme putting them together, putting energy into the molecule, and in some cases it's meant to store energy for whenever it's needed, like a sugar, or in some cases like ATP that we'll look at in this video series. It's designed to be broken apart and put together pretty quickly, pretty rapidly, pretty often, with the idea of releasing energy in that mindset of exponential release compared to what you put into the process. The idea of potential energy, the idea of those enzymes putting energy into the molecules, whether it's meant to be a long-term storage in a cell's reference, long-term anyway, or quickly to be released. But it's the idea of having energy inside those molecules, and they're inside the bonds. In between the bonds is where that energy is. We'll look at endergonic reaction. It has its own video, but the idea of taking individual components and building that molecule, storing that energy inside. When we look at the endergonic exergonic graphs, it'll really showcase what we're talking about. Endergonic reactions have more energy inside of them when they're done, so they've got that. We'll introduce the G factor, G energy. They'll have a positive G energy. The idea of reduction, oxidation. It'll be one of the trickier. Tends to be kind of a trickier, higher mental capacity process. But it's the idea. What makes it so difficult is the word reduction. You're actually gaining something, but it's called reduction because it's the energy level that's being. If a molecule has a like I say, a +1, and then we add electrons through cellular respiration, or in cellular respiration or photosynthesis, we add electrons. We are adding to the molecule, yes, but we are reducing the energy value. If I add an electron to a molecule that's a +1, now it's neutral. Okay, if it's a neutral molecule and I add an electron, now it's a -1. So it's that energy level that's being reduced. And of course, if we're talking building molecules, we're talking photosynthesis. Prime example of that. But it's the idea of those plants taking the energy from the sun. And when we get to chapter 8, that whole process of the chlorophyll so absorbing the energy and how that affects the electrons and how it affects the whole process, it's interesting to see. We got a nice simulation that makes that easy to visualize. But it's just the idea of these words that we're going to be using for 3 chapters associated with building molecules. And this video is important because when we're in class, regardless of what level you are watching this, when we're in class and we're talking about what's going on with a particular molecule, one of the things that we're going to want to establish is, are we building or are we breaking the molecule? And if once we decide that, then we know what words to use to help explain and to help understand that. If we're building, then we know that dehydration synthesis is involved. We know the metabolic pathway is an anabolic pathway. We know that we're storing potential energy. We know that an inorganic reaction is a part of that. We know that we're reducing the overall energy level because we're adding electrons. And of course, photosynthesis is a main example of all these. But that's the purpose of this, of setting these word sets, is so we can understand and talk about what's happening in a way that is understandable and easy to digest. Well, that's our video over the words associated with building molecules. When we come back next time, we'll talk about words that are associated with breaking apart molecules. We'll see you then.